to start tonight off on a real happy note. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity or the pleasure of getting this book, but we've gone through 280 of them. They sold out in a month, and we've ordered more, and I heard we've sold over 10 tonight. We have orders for 30. So they're going like hotcakes. The reason? Hazel Hoppe. This is Bethany's Pebbles and Flowers, Memories of a Life in Rural Connecticut by Hazel Hoppe. And if Hazel would honor us by stepping up here, I'd like to give her something in appreciation. Life's full of surprises. Hazel Hoppe is hereby recognized and honored for all her efforts in recording and sharing her memories of early life in Bethany. The directors of the Bethany Historical Society wish to thank Hazel for writing and donating to the Society her most recent work, Bethany Pebbles and Flowers, Memories of Life in a Rural Connecticut Town. Hazel also wrote Bethany Yesterday, one-room schools, 1978, and was a contributor to the 1982 Bethany Sesquicentennial publication, Bethany Times Remembered. Bethany Pebbles and Flowers generated great interest in the community, as illustrated by the fact that the first printing in December 1997 of 280 books was sold out in a month, and orders were taken for a second printing. Presented to the writer at the meeting, Bethany Historical Society, February 20th, 1998. Thank you.
Well, I thank you all very much. This is a very pleasant surprise, I must say. It makes me happy to know how quickly the book sold, but I enjoyed doing it. It was quite a pleasure to me, too. So thank you all.
And the books are available right out front. We have another printing. I'd like to, at this time, call on our building committee, mainly Bob Britton, to give us a report on the building and how it's coming along. Bob?
Thank you, Tom. It's hard to believe that we took over the old Bethany Town Hall only about 4 years ago. And at a recent Board of Directors meeting, I brought up a draft document entitled Restoration Goals. And it's dated March 13th, 1994. And the directors of the society, having received the old town hall from the Episcopal Church, sat down and we wrote out a wish list. This is where we wanted to be 10 years from now. We wanted to replace the roof. We wanted to install new gutters and leaders. We wanted to repair and repaint wood trim on the outside of the building. We wanted to put storm windows on. We wanted to take the old asbestos siding off that was hazardous and unsightly. We wanted to insulate the walls. The building had not been insulated, of course, when it was built. We wanted to put a new roof on the vault addition so that it wouldn't look out of place being a flat roof. We wanted to have handicap access to both levels of the building so that we could accommodate all people. We wanted to correct improper grading around the building so that water would not seep into the basement. On the interior, we wanted to repaint walls and ceilings, refinish floors, refurbish, replace the lighting panel, install appropriate lights and exit signs, as well as emergency lights, put in a fire and intrusion alarm. Downstairs, we want to put a new fire door, and in general, meet all of the fire codes, as well as the building codes and handicap access codes. We wanted to remove all the unnecessary partitions and have the bathrooms in the basement fully handicap accessible. The emergency lights and overhead lights down there needed replacement as well. Very little has been done to the building in the last several decades. We wanted to modify the vault area with an appropriate door so we could use it for archival storage. We wanted to put a kitchen in with some cabinets, take out the asbestos floor tiles and pipe insulation and things like that, paint the basement walls, put in a new heating system, and oil tank. We've done it. I hope we have. We think we've done very well with the money that we were able to get from various sources, including the generosity of the people in this room. And we certainly want to share the building with the community. To that end, we hope to have some exhibits there this summer. There's a newly formed group of artists in Bethany that would like to have an art show there, and we're certainly going to welcome them. And with the exception of maybe doing the final grading and the storm windows that are now on order, we have really accomplished our goals. The only other thing that remains to be done is plantings, and the garden club has assured us that they are going to be able to do that this spring. They have the funds set aside, and they have it designed. So that's our report.
Bob found that piece of paper before our last meeting and read it to us. It just blew our mind. That's why we wanted to read it tonight. It's just amazing when you think of what you want to do 10 years ahead. And bam, you've done it. Thanks to most of you. Okay, thinking of our building, what it's done for us, and how it was done, I'd like to call Joe Crisco up, please. A lot of people have helped us on this, but this is the man that sort of greased the skids, as they say. This is a copy of McDermott's picture of our building. On the bottom, in appreciation for your continued support, Bethany Historical Society. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it very much, and I have to be honest with you. One of the reasons I did get involved because I have a soft spot in my heart for short guys with receding hairlines. But sincerely, Bob and his crew have just done an outstanding job, and Bethany is a special place, and along with John Ford and Russ Dahl and Melissa Spear and others who contribute so much, and to all of you, I consider it sort of a Camelot, and I'm just proud to represent you in the State Senate. And I know this won't be the last of it because I've already received a drawing of a water mill, something that Robert is interested in restoring. So, of course, I'm there to help whenever I could. But again, thank you. And, words are cheap. In my role the past 6 years, you come across and experience a lot of criticism, considerably. And every once in a while, you do find, a great moment such as this when people appreciate, what you could do. And because of that, I sincerely want to thank you. And it's nice because my wife Pat is here, and she gets all the bad phone calls most of the time. So it's just great, and thank you so much. That
was nice and short from a politician. I'd like to remind you of the items we have outside books, all of Hazel's books. The tickets for our dinner coming up early March, and our membership committee. So anybody that is interested in any of those items, please partake on your way out. And after our speech, we will have refreshments and so forth at the back. At this time, we don't have any streets in Bethany, by the way. So I don't know if this is Bethany's main street or what it is, but I'll introduce Bob.
It appears that I'm the only thing standing in your way of getting refreshments, so I probably am a pretty good target. Tonight, I'm certainly glad to see so many of you here. I realize I've talked about roads a number of years ago when we first organized the group. Tonight I want to do something a little bit different. I'm not sure what yet, but I can hardly wait to see. I want to look at one particular road, Amity Road, and I'm probably cheating on this because it's really going to be, in addition to Amity Road, a small section of Litchfield Turnpike that used to be Amity Road. What I'm talking about is Route 69, and it has a special place in Bethany, especially a special place in Bethany in the 20th century. Bethany, Amity Road is Bethany's main street, even though we don't have any streets, any boulevards, any avenues, although we'll get to that later. It's Bethany's main street because not only it's central, but it gets more traffic than any other street or any other road in the town. And it has more types of civic functions. Its position is a little different from what it was in the 19th century. In the 19th century, probably the main street of Bethany would be Litchfield Turnpike. And why do I say that? Well, because Litchfield Turnpike was probably the route that most people used to get from New Haven to Waterbury, or ultimately to Litchfield, the Litchfield Turnpike. We'll see a map shortly when we start the slides. But the Litchfield Turnpike, as you may or may not know, was a toll road. It was incorporated in 1797, 201 years ago, and they charged toll, just like any toll road would, except it was privately owned. It was owned by a group of investors. However, in the 19th century, people sometimes didn't like to pay for services if they could get away with it. We know this no longer happens. And as a result, they found that using part of an older road, pretty much where Amity Road is today, they could get around the toll gate that was on Litchfield Turnpike near Bradley Road and Woodbridge and not have to pay anything. Hence, Amity Road got more and more use as a shun pike, someplace where you would go to shun or get away from that dreaded and expensive turnpike. The part of Amity Road in Bethany today is very similar to the old county road that was laid out back in the early 18th century, 1722. It was laid out by a surveyor by the name of Thompson. What we're going to do today, I'm not going to go back in history a long way. I'm going to try to give you some stuff that's familiar. I know one of the problems in the past, we show you photographs, here's an old house, everybody says, where the heck is that? And then you're on to the next slide. What I'm going to try to do today, for those of you who are directionally challenged, I'm going to try, no sexist concepts involved here. We're not going to talk about north and south any more than necessary. We are going to look at Amity Road as if we were kind of on a bus tour. As a matter of fact, that's something I've always thought we could do as a fundraiser. If somebody wants to organize it, I'll be happy to take part in it. We're going to start at the Woodbridge line. We all know how we breathe a sigh of relief when we get by that point. Sorry, Don. And we're going to go northward toward Naugatuck, and we're just going to look and maybe get a new insight on the kinds of things that you would see on Litchfield Turnpike as you drive today. Maybe give you an idea and what was there formerly, maybe a little bit of a better appreciation of what's there now. All right, Tommy, you want to turn out the lights? They're tired of looking at me. I can tell. Yeah. Okay, this title slide, I couldn't resist. I gotta wait for the timer to come down because this is not Bethany, Connecticut. It's Bethany, Oklahoma. And this came from a brochure that Timer gave me last year after a recent trip. There you are. Thank you. Okay, this early map, 1792, shows Woodbridge and Bethany before we had good sense enough to break away from them. Sorry, Don, there I go again. Don Menzies is here, chairman of the Amity Woodbridge Historical Society. Pretty much this map shows Woodbridge, and probably right around here somewhere you're in Bethany, and continues up into Naugatuck. Probably the line is in there. It's very difficult to tell from this early map. But the interesting thing is this is the old county road. This part is probably Amity Road. This is the old Congregational Church. This is probably the Episcopal Church that stood on what's now the Niederman property at Tuttle and Carrington, then known as Church Corner. Hard map to read. We all know this one. This is the Beers from the Beers Atlas of 1868, and just want to give you an indication of where we are here. Even I'm having trouble seeing it, but basically this is the Litchfield Turnpike, and Amity Road is here. Amity Road, you'll notice, is pretty straight, unlike Litchfield Turnpike. It doesn't go diagonally across town like Litchfield does. Instead, it follows these lines that made up the early land grants in the town. Most of our roads and property lines originally went back to those early land grants. And here we are entering Bethany, again, right side of the leaf. And the first thing we see is the greenhouse, formerly owned by Alex and Lena Fenwick. Well, I guess we'll stop this in a little bit. But this is what the greenhouse looked like in 1934. The greenhouse on the left was brought to Bethany in 1927. There was not a new greenhouse at that time. In Bethany, we truly believe in recycling. And this is a good example of it. Just beyond, you'll see the peak of the old Russell House, which still stands on Round Hill Road, the road that intersects Amity as soon as you get across the Bethany line. I'm going to kind of apologize here, or kind of explain here. We're not going to show every building on Amity Road. You'd be here till tomorrow morning. Well, probably you wouldn't. Maybe I would. But I just want to point out some of the range of activities that take place on this important road in Bethany. Obviously, that was the, let me go back, the Uniroyal Experiment Station. Previously, it was U.S. Rubber. And it's an agricultural experiment station. They experiment with pesticides. Am I anybody's way? Good. They experiment with pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. This is our largest taxpayer. This is our biggest industry. Laticrete International, they make mortars for construction, for adhering tiles. to the interior and exterior of buildings. Will and I cheated on this one. This is Will's idea. By the way, most of these photographs were taken by my son Will, who's operating the video equipment here. And what I'm getting at here is, actually we cheated. This came from Route 8. In case you thought we had some delusions of grandeur here. Only the photograph. We didn't take the whole time. But I want to point out that Route 63 only came into existence back in the early 30s. Before that, Amity Road was a town road, then the state took it over as Route 201 and began to make improvements. And as we go along, we're going to be seeing some evidences of the improvements that the state made in the early 30s, starting in 1931, to Amity Road, which changed it radically. And we still today are impacted by those changes. What was happening by 1931, the period of the 20s had passed, and the period of the 20s was pivotal in transportation. Before the 1920s, a horse in Bethany, either for transportation or for draft purposes, was essential. And an automobile, which was becoming available, was a luxury. After the 1920s, the automobile was a necessity, and the horse became a luxury. A tremendous change in a very short period of time. This is one of the two aerial photographs I'm going to show you, and I know some of you have trouble with aerials. I couldn't resist this one because it was taken in 1931, and it shows what's now Old Amity Road, and this is the newly built section of Amity Road. This group of buildings in here is Pleasant View Farm. And you can see that this field, for instance, was bisected by the new road. And this became the site of Pleasant View Service Center. We'll get there in a minute. This house is we're right at the corner. This house still stands. This is the office building for the Sorensen Trucking Company. And you're going to see some of the Clark Barone machines because they got the contract for widening Amity Road in 1931. In the spring of 1931, they started what I believe was a 5-mile project, starting with Payne's Corner, that's Route 67 in Woodbridge, and going northward to the intersection of Litchfield Turnpike. And we hope to get there by the end of this talk. I just kind of like the old steam shovel. This is a true steam shovel. That's this is the steam boiler here. Pleasant View Dairy was owned by the Hirsch's and was located or at least some of the fields were located on the present location of the Pleasant View Garage. By the way, this is how it looked in 1956. This is how it looked 10 years earlier. The road had been newly paved. And you'll notice, maybe you won't notice, that you see the lines, very rectangular lines. Those lines are expansion cracks, and they're necessary because Amity Road was made out of reinforced concrete. When I was younger, we used to refer to these two roads a little differently. Sometimes we used to call this a cement road, and Litchfield Turnpike was the tar road. Also, because of differing elevation, very often the Amity Road was called the upper road, and Litchfield Turnpike the lower road. Now, any of you that are old timers probably remember hearing that, but I bet you haven't heard it in the last couple of decades. Welcome to tonight. How to get this in here? This was one of my favorite restaurants. I wish they moved back. This little building just beyond the Pleasant View Service Center was built for the purpose of actually a body shop, bronze body shop. And it was, thought somebody was stepping on my foot. And it was converted into this restaurant. Now, of course, it's a flower shop and post office, Bethany post office. You notice the kind of cluster of really important civic services around this road. I think the puddle is still there, but this now, of course, is Teddy B's restaurant. This is before the pool club. A little larger today. Moving along toward Naugatuck. On your right-hand side, notice I didn't say east, but I could have. On the right-hand side, we have the Poletsky Garage. And this was taken in 1956. One of the things I can point out that indicates that Amity Road is the 20th century road and Litchfield Turnpike the 19th century road. In the 19th century, Litchfield Turnpike had a number of services available to travelers. Several taverns. This is in Bethany. Several blacksmith shops. A wagon shop. These are the kind of services that you provide for travelers. And you don't put them on the back street, do you? If you want to have a service like that, you put it where the traffic is. And Litchfield Turnpike was the location of those in, over 100 years ago. But in the period, in this century, because we became dependent upon the automobile, and Amity Road became the automobile road, you'll notice a number of services for transients, for automobiles, tends to be located on Amity Road. This is not because of zoning. This was before zoning. As a matter of fact, zoning tried to reflect what had already happened with land use in the area. You probably can't see it, but the shape indicates it was a Ford dealer at that time. Not the only car dealer on Amity Road in the earlier part of the century. Another thing I want to point out before I go on to the next one is the gas pumps. At one time, Bethany had 9 gas stations. We now have 1. 8 of those 9 gas stations were on Amity Road. Whoops. I couldn't really avoid putting this in. I just like this one. Obviously, this is, it's not obvious to you, it's obvious to me. This is the crossing of the brook at the Poletsky farm. And this hill goes up, and the Treat Johnson house is up there. I'm not helping you much, am I? This is the hill just beyond the Poletsky garage. Does that help you? And we don't know what happened to the truck. I guess he got into some soft shoulder. This barn is gone. The Poletsky family was, I guess we can remember them because they're one of the few families that lost a son in World War II, Nicholas Poletsky. Franklin Hoppe was another one who gave his life for the town and for the country in World War II. Both of these families lived on Amity Road. Moving further along, on the left-hand side, if you're driving with us, this is a house that sits up on the bank, and it's hard to see at high speed. And believe it or not, some people do travel at high speed on Route 63. Especially during commuting times. I don't really know why. But I thought you'd be interested in seeing what this looked like 100 years ago. You're going to find that most houses in Bethany 100 years ago looked run down. People left Bethany either for areas where the farming was much, much better, or for nearby cities where manufacturing jobs paid far more than agricultural ones in this area. Present-day Amity Road is right down here. This, if you drive by, although partially obscured by vegetation, this retaining wall is still there. Great shot. Luckily, they're putting a roof on it. They're staging and a ladder. They're putting a new roof on it. If they hadn't, we probably wouldn't be seeing that today. Just beyond that, there's a house of Treat B. Johnson, very prominent member of the community, very responsible for the construction of the original part of the building we're in now. And one of the things that he was concerned with, along with others in the community, was formation of a library. And the library, Bethany Library, was formed in 1930, and this small cottage was the home of it for until 1936, when our present building was built. That building is still there. Okay, moving along further, on the right-hand side, the next house we're going to notice is this one. Again, it's kind of hard to see as you go by at the speeds that we hope you don't go by at. This is the Dayton house. I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of these houses. This is not a talk about Bethany houses. I'm hoping somebody in the audience would like to do that in the near future. See me after. However, this one does deserve some mention, because this one deserves a talk all of its own. Because this was the scene of the only hostile action in Bethany during the Revolutionary War, where a British officer came over, was able to get some Tory sympathizers to participate in a raid on Captain Dayton's house, and the rest will be in a future talk. Just want to tease you a little bit. Not a very good photograph, but it does brighten the room up for a moment. I can see who's asleep. This shows the same structure as it was before 1931. Actually, this is probably around the turn of the century. The difference is the road is here now. What happened? Well, they moved the house, and they moved it and turned it sideways, so the front door now faces the road. And the reason for this is that change that took place in 1931, this widening of Amity Road that had really far-reaching effects for practically the entire length of the road. Okay, this particular house now inhabited by Yvonne Johnson is, I'm trying to think of the old name for it, I think it's an Atwater house. At any rate, quite close to the road. You probably wouldn't notice it, but if you're driving by, in order to avoid this house, they jogged the road out 10 feet. So there's one of the few places in Amity Road where there's a slight jog in it, because that house is so close to the road. It really didn't look too much different before the road was paved. This is probably when it was still a dirt road. It was, by the way, Amity Road was first paved in 1917, and all they did was give it a kind of a coat of oil, as was generally done. But it's interesting that it was the first paved road in Bethany, which I think tells you that already they were responding as early as 1917 to the needs of the automobile, because horses really didn't like pavement and still don't. The Jacksons, anyone remember the Jackson brothers? This 1956 photo shows us the barn is now a studio, and this says, I think, Fieldview Farm, and this was their dairy. I believe, somebody can correct me later when no one's hearing. I believe this was the last dairy farm on Amity Road. I believe. I think the Biletskis gave up milk cows before this. Okay, this is not strictly on Amity Road, but I'm cheating here a little bit, and I'm going to show you briefly and practically without comment some of the old houses that are so readily visible from Amity Road that they're really part of if we had a streetscape. I guess it's roadscape. It's interesting to note, it's interesting to me anyway, that of the 94 houses that Alice Bunton illustrates in her book, Bethany's Old Houses and Community Buildings, of those 94, over 25% of them are either on Amity Road or visible from Amity Road, such as this one. Does that look like the same house? That's what it looked like 100 years ago. Many of these these photographs have never been displayed before, and I really welcome these opportunities to let you, to kind of share them with you folks. And the source for these photos is the families who are represented in this room, who have been kind enough to let us copy their family albums and who have been, and thus share them with their townspeople. Same house. Hard to believe. Yeah, Charlie Booth's old house, Nanny Booth. Old timers will remember them. I bet it didn't look like that when you lived there. But if I didn't show you the new one, the modern photo, you wouldn't know where I was talking about. That's why I'm trying to. Where this is history made simple tonight. To give you, this is Center Schoolhouse. There's been a talk on schools. We're not going to go into detail. Reason I put this in here is to show you that this picture that I think was taken in the early 20s sometime, when the automobile started to take over, and I think take over is a fair appraisal of what happened. When they took over Amity Road, you'll notice that a protection fence had to be installed to separate the children from the automobiles, which is always a good idea. I like the old tire there. That's probably from a Model T or something. But you can see how close it was to the road. In the horse and buggy days, there was no disadvantage to having a house or a public building close to the road. As a matter of fact, it was probably an advantage. Nobody got run over by an ox. I have a Model T Ford, and top speed is about 35 miles an hour. But by today's standards, that's pretty slow. But it must have been like breaking through the sound barrier if your previous experience had been driving an ox team to New Haven at a much slower speed. An ox, wide open, goes about 2 miles an hour. That building was replaced by the center fire station we have today. I just kind of like this one. This was taken in 1950 when our fleet consisted of those two Fords. It's just a nice photograph. But you've already heard the talk on firehouses, so we're going to skip that. Go right on to this building, which I think deserves a little bit of time from us tonight, probably because it may not be with us very long. The heirs have already discussed getting a demolition permit for it within the last week or two. What's interesting that many of you may or may not know, this building, which it's a Ransom Hitchcock house, but was inhabited by the Hinman family for many, many years. John Hinman, a very distinguished member of the community. It was a post office. It had at one time had the only public telephone in Bethany that connected with the outside world. But it sits on a 55-acre piece of land, and about 2 weeks ago, the South Central Regional Water Authority purchased all of the land except for the house and a building lot. So they bought about 50 acres of land. So in case you didn't know that, there's 50 acres of land that are going to be held as open space. Immediately to the left of the house, as you look at it, you'll see a kind of a dark object, maybe in a future slide. This is what it looked like in about 1900. What we're kind of doing is we're looking back a century and seeing how things look. This was a little beat up then, but not as bad as it is now. This is the small building just to the left of it, and there's not much left. Not much remains of it. This is what you see from the road, houses in the background. But this small building was very important to Bethany in its in the earlier part of the century. It was the site of the printing shop of John Hinman. He had his equipment downstairs. Upstairs was the town clerk's office, where the records were kept and where people would come to transact the important aspects of business in Bethany. This is what it used to look like. And this little part was, if you can look in the windows there, you can see the old printing presses. We have photographs of it. I hope to do I hope that we can have someone here volunteer to do a talk on the Amity Star, which really was an outgrowth of this print shop, which was run by George Vale in later years. Okay, we're looking south here, so don't get too mixed up, but I had to throw this in because we use this on our poster. And it just shows what Amity Road looked like about 1900. No automobile had probably ever driven there. These are just a single track of buggy ruts. Very few trees. You'll notice in all these photographs, very few trees in the backgrounds. There was most of the land in Bethany had been cleared for agriculture, or for fuel wood, or for lumber, or for charcoal. And all of those led to very, very open vistas. Okay, we're facing the right direction. We're facing toward Naugatuck again, rather than facing toward New Haven. And I just had to show you this Clark Barone machine. He's worked his way up, from that intersection down at Pleasant View Garage all the way up to the Congregational Church. And they're taking down the hill. Originally, you can see it was much steeper. The little cars there. The steeple, as it was before the hurricane of 1938, removed that element. And this is as it looked newly paved, with a cut that we're familiar with today. I apologize for the quality of this picture. However, it's the only photograph I've ever been able to find that shows you what Perry's Hall looks like. And I don't think anybody in this room has ever seen this. This very nice stone wall is still evident just south of the child's home. And this shows Perry's Hall. We have interior shots of it, but up until I ran across this, I'd never seen an exterior shot. There you can see the flagpole, the double doors, the four windows, the chimney. It's a kind of a small building, built in the 1870s, so what? Well, it was used, among other things, for town meetings, public suppers, and things like that. Because between the 1870s and 1914, there was no Bethany Town Hall. This was the only place that we could meet. We had to rent it from the people that owned the Child's House, who also owned this. And if we wanted to hold an election or something like that, we had to go there. The Child's House, as it appears today, had a number of uses over the years, from a parsonage to a school to pocketbook manufacturer, and as it looked the early part of the century. One of the things you're going to notice, in addition to what I mentioned about the fact that there weren't many trees, there are no foundation plantings to speak of. People didn't put plantings around their homes. It wasn't, I don't know if it's because it wasn't fashionable, or people in Bethany were so poor that if they're going to do any cultivation, it's going to provide them with some food or some income. Very little foundation planting around the Congregational Church, but you can see how clear it is as the old church shed from the Congregational Church. I had to throw this in. My son Will got up on the roof of the Historical Society building to take this when the new steeple was recently erected. And this is a nice shot. The sun kind of highlights the newly installed steeple. One of the very successful restoration projects that have taken place in Bethany's traditional center on Amity Road. This particular shot just kind of shows you what the Episcopal Church, the rectory, some of the outbuildings, not the present ones by the way, looked like in the early 50s. Ken Gooch took this from the steeple of the Congregational Church. Not an aerial photo. Close-up of the Episcopal Rectory, which is on your right-hand side, in the center. Just a nice shot of the Episcopal Church. very, very handsome structure. We have a lot to be proud of. I know a lot of times we just drive through Bethany and most of we grumble because the guy in front of us is going 5 miles an hour too slow, or the guy in the back of us is on our tail and wants us to go 5 miles an hour faster. But you really got to stop and look and appreciate what we have here. One of the things is the only church wagon shed left in the state of Connecticut. Every church had one in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in the 19th century. This one was built in 1858. This photograph, which Will took from the steeple of the Episcopal Church, you can see there's a lot of athletic photographers around here. It shows the building before we restored it. And it's got some waves to the roof, and it's kind of sinking, and it's a little bow-legged. And through the efforts of the committee headed by Art Slicer, funds were raised, and you can see the success over here on the ubiquitous fundraising thermometer. The building was entirely jacked up, and all rotted members were replaced. New sheathing was applied, and this is as it appeared soon after the restoration was complete. Just kind of a pretty scene with the wreath on the end there. Bethany's center on Amity Road served many purposes, many civic functions. The town hall was built there in 1914. I just thought I'd show you a couple of things that happened in 1932 when we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the incorporation of the town. This is a parade taking place on Amity Road in 1832. I bet if you got your radar gun out, they wouldn't be going over 2 miles an hour. And I'm only pointing out this particular use because we still have parades. Our Memorial Day parade, what does it do? It comes down Amity Road. It must be our main street. The carriage connection associated with the fundraiser for the carriage shed, we used Amity Road. And a similar conveyance, the kind of conveyance that you probably would have seen 100 years ago. These are all the dignitaries lined up for their formal portrait in 1932 in the Old Town Hall, all gussied up for the centennial. Now the scene of the site of the Bethany Historical Society. We're kind of proud of it. We've just I kind of like the flag there. This is a preview. I don't know if Russ is going to get mad at me or not, but a preview of what the cover of the Newtown Report is going to have on it. It's a photograph of our Historical Society. This photograph was taken by Dennis Martins, and he was able to get our sign in there. You're going to find inside the cover of somewhere inside the town report, a photograph of the town hall as it appeared on the cover of the town report for 1930. And it doesn't look a lot different. Matter of fact, if you look carefully, you'll even see this tree in the 1930 photograph. Bethany Library, I just want to give you this. I like this one. It was taken soon after it was built in 1936. I think this was from a glass negative dated 1940. Very classic building, a handsome building. Again, you notice not many trees around. And part of what's going on in the center of Bethany is the project that resulted in more than doubling the size of our library. This is the original library here, and all of this is addition. And it really is more than 200% of the space that we had prior to that. Okay, we're just going to, we've tarried enough in the center of town. Elisha's Beecher House, kind of as it appears today, it just has a kind of a nice, almost a George Dury painting look to this particular photo. This is what it looked like 100 years ago. Want to see it back again? Yeah. All right. You're going to get it whether you wanted it or not anyway. Okay. Amazing. we're really fortunate that, this has good, I always look at the roof, and see, is this building on the way out? And obviously not. This building had a good roof on it. But these were all wooden shingles in those days. And when the wooden shingles outlasted their useful life of 40 years or so and began to rot, if not attended to, you certainly would lose your building. We're going to stop here again and talk about transportation. And I just put this here to remind me that I want to mention something about Amity Road and transportation. In the 19th century, mass transit in Bethany was by stagecoach on Litchfield Turnpike. There was regular coach service between Waterbury and New Haven via Litchfield Turnpike. The last stagecoach, according to Tyler Davidson, ended regular daily service between Waterbury and New Haven in the spring of 1907. After that, up until the 60s or something like that, we had various kinds of mass transit on Amity Road. You'll notice here we have they're going up Amity Road here, leaves the Eagle Tavern and stops at Perkins Tavern, 12 miles from New Haven. Then goes to Naugatuck, Waterbury, Watertown. If you went all the way to Watertown, 28 miles, you'd have to pay a whole $1. This is the kind of, I just put this, I have a lot of stuff like this, but this one I just like the appearance of the bus. And this was in the, I guess this was in the late 20s, early 30s. But notice, we don't have mass transit today. We say, we don't have the technology, it's cost too much money. How come we could do it in the 20s and 30s? In Bethany, on the half hour. If you wanted to go to Waterbury, you just stood out there and waited for the bus. If you wanted to go to New Haven, you just stood out and waited for the bus. Try it today. I want to stop at this point and just point out one more thing that many of you may not know, that Bethany almost became an urban area. And it's just a quirk of fate that we did. Back in the 1890s, a company was incorporated called the Woodbridge and Bethany Electric Railway Company. And many of the prominent people in Bethany and Woodbridge were investors. And they went to Hartford seeking a charter to put an interurban trolley line through Bethany, which was supposed to be the path was supposed to go just east of Bethany Center. So it would have been in back of what's now the Historical Society building. And typically when that happened, there would be stations along the way. By the way, these trolleys went very fast, much faster than any automobile could. What happened is the legislature kind of balked for some reason on giving the Woodbridge and Bethany Electric Railway Company a charter to go from New Haven to Waterbury. They went to Hartford. They said, we want a line that goes from New Haven to Waterbury, and we want a spur line that goes over to Seymour along Route 67. Well, the legislature gave them part of it. They said, well, you can go to Payne's Corner, Route 67, but that's all. And the investors met and decided and talked about it, and they determined that it wouldn't pay them to run a trolley car just between what's now the Amity Shopping Center and the Route 67-63 intersection. And it was never built. Imagine what Bethany would have been like if we had a trolley through here that would allow you in a few minutes to get to New Haven or Waterbury. It would have enabled people before the turn of the century to move out here and to live in what is sometimes called a trolley suburb. The trolley suburb is kind of interesting because it follows a trolley line, sort of like a tree trunk, and then any roads near the trolley line get intensive development within walking distance of that trolley line. And then beyond that, nothing. you would be experiencing today a Bethany quite unlike what you see when you drive up Amity Road. The Hoadley House, actually it's a Wheeler Beecher house. This got the name Hoadley in the early 20th century because it was designed by David Hoadley, as was the Episcopal Church. This is how it looked like in horse and buggy days. And of course, for a horse and buggy, you've got to have a hitching post, tie your horse up to. Might even be I don't know if that's a block or not, hard to tell. Usually you had a mounting block, a big stone that you could step on to step up into the high carriages. Some of these Jeeps that you see that have been lifted up, I often think that, if everybody's going to drive around in one of those, maybe you need a mounting block again. Immediately across the road from the Hoadley House is, I just want to throw in that, we still have some barns. It's really a reminder of a farm that existed here. The Dimmenstein, it was the Dimmenstein farm most recently, before the Pleasant Drive subdivision went in. And really all that's left of the farm is this one barn. Okay, we're moving further up. We're not quite at Naugatuck yet, are we? I'm not sure what our speed is. This is a photograph from the, I guess this is 1956, of the police barracks. Very important to Bethany for our security, and something that provides a service that we really appreciate. I particularly like this photo. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not. This was down in the Schoolhouse Ice Cream store. They loaned it to us to photograph. But I have to admit that I'm old enough to remember back when the state police had black and whites. What we used to call them, the black and whites, for obvious reasons. I'm not sure what they were doing with the yacht. We cheated again. This is Will's idea. We're back on Route 8. If you don't think we're brave, we actually stopped and took this photograph on Route 8. I'm not sure if that's brave or foolhardy. But at any rate, the reason for this is Bethany has 3 business districts presently, 2 of which are on Amity Road. One of which we kind of went through the area south of, in the area around Pleasant View Service Center. Dick Farrell's, I just started off with this because it's the first commercial enterprise that we reached on our travel toward Naugatuck. Interestingly enough, the office is located in what was formerly a residence, Spencer residence. Okay, this is your second and I guess last aerial photograph. And I thought it would be good because we're going to be looking at some of the buildings that no longer exist. And I know it's hard for people that have never seen them to imagine where a building is that no longer exists. Like if you go up to Maine, ask somebody where to go, and they say, well, just go up this road and take a right where the old schoolhouse used to be. And, sometimes I feel like we're doing that with you folks. But we're going to try and avoid that. Amity Road, straight as an arrow. This is an early photograph because it's still, the airport isn't fully developed. We're not going to talk about the airport much because we've already done that, and the video is available along with all the other talks that we've done. But we're going to look at a house here, the Krell House, that no longer exists. It's taken down in the early 1960s. And we're going to look at this residence right here, the Smith House, later owned by John Hinman before he moved south. I'll go to the center of Bethany. The airport is here, the old hangar. This field right in here is the location of the Bethany 63 Shopping Center. And as we move up, we're going to see this is where Billy's Ice Cream used to be. This is Town and Country in there, now closed. A couple of old houses in here, one right next to the airport, one up here where Eric Stone is. I guess you've seen enough of that. Yep, ball fields are there. This is the Crowell House. Not too long before it was demolished, or removed rather. Really, parts of this building were saved, which is fortunate. And I don't really know, maybe somebody can tell me, I've forgotten the story of where these materials went. What's interesting about this is, as a youngster, I can always remember that this was a house with a red light on the roof. But not for that reason. You'll see the light here was really one of the runway lights for the airport. And it was to discourage aircraft from visiting. The property presently has this structure, which was the Orange National Bank in this 1982 photograph. The next house is on the right-hand side, just before you get to the Bethany 63 Shopping Center. And Sergeant Drive is right about here. And if you walk in there, there are a few stones left. You can see some of the remains of this building. You can see it was boarded up here at that time. I kind of like this one. You can't read it. I'll read a little bit to you. It's called Pleasant View Farm, two-story house with 9 rooms. House is in good condition, number of barns, 90 acres of land, 2 wells, fruit trees. This is 1917. Under roads, it says State Road under construction, and this meant the original tarring, not the 1931 upgrade. And the interesting thing about this 90-acre farm is its price, $5,500. And this is its ultimate demise. And I believe this was 1958. It was burned by the fire department as practice. Mr. Whittemore, the owner, no longer wanted to maintain the structure, which he had previously rented, and no longer wanted to pay taxes on it. Just beyond that, the Bethany 63 Shopping Center. That's the building that occupies that field that I pointed out earlier. The next building on the right is Ivar's. Before that, those of you who are old enough to remember Pop Anderson's. Otto Anderson ran this and lived here. He only lived in the center section. Ivar, who was a more aggressive in his merchandising, added these 2 commodious wings to result in the present retail complex that you see now. One of the gas stations that I mentioned was on Amity Road. The old-fashioned green one in the center was kerosene. 1982, it hadn't changed much. The earlier one was 1956. This is here just to show you that there are many modes of transportation in Bethany. We talked about oxen, horses, automobiles, and of course, aircraft. I don't have any picture of a trolley car. I should have had one in here. Just a close-up of the airport. This is back when we were a little more ambitious in our claims to fame. The Airport Study Committee, I believe, is going to be recommending that, or at least let me put it that, I can't speak for a committee. Let me put it this way, the Historical Society has recommended to the town that the airport hangar, even though it's not an early one, be retained because it's the only remnant of the old airport. And I just showed you, I thought I'd show you this 1957 photo of how it went up. and it became used as a town garage. Looking from a hangar toward the town and country, or whatever you want to call it, you'll notice this little building, which was the airport diner. You notice again, many of these are transportation related. They're servicing, to a great extent, commuters, to some extent, the airport trade. Somebody tell me who these are. I believe this is a photograph of the service window at the airport diner. Bill Hoppe, can you tell me anything? Am I right?
I think it is, yes, I don't know who the people are.
Okay. I didn't either. I was hoping somebody might recognize them. It's just a nice photograph with the milkshake machine here, if you can't see it. Here's some Sunday glasses upside down, just waiting for the thirsty customer or a milkshake, or the person with a sweet tooth like me for the Sunday. The next house has had a number of commercial uses. This is right next to the airport. Further up, we have relocated the highway garage to this new building, this new complex actually. This is a separate building back here for salt. Recycling center doesn't show. But you notice how we're still grouping these civic functions along Main Street. Do drop in. Maybe some ladies that know more about styles than I do can identify. That looks like what, 20s or 30s, something like that. This is a menu that was recently donated to us. By a time I would show you the prices of the goodies. One of the effects of the widening of Amity Road was moving buildings. Center Schoolhouse was moved back from the road. The Congregational Church was moved back from the road. You remember the Dayton House was moved. And this is probably one of the earliest commercial buildings in Bethany. Do drop in. And they jacked it up, moved it back, built a new foundation under it, dropped it down. However, you'll notice that the enterprising owners never closed. It says open here. We don't care if we're 5 feet in the air. We can still give you top-notch beverages. You have to go up that chicken ladder. This is what it looked like in 1982 when it was the home of Billy's Ice Cream, before he moved across the road. A little further along, this is the home of Eric Stone. It's on the left-hand side of the road. This is how it looked about 100 years ago. I'm glad they're fixing the roof. I don't think I'd like to climb up that ladder, though. It looks a little hazardous. One of the locust trees, most of them have fallen now, but this was called Locust Farm. The characteristic locust. I don't have a photograph of the Fox Farm. If anybody has one, I'd like to have a chance to copy it. However, here is an advertisement for it. This was located on the corner of present-day Fairwood Road and Amity Road. And they raised several silver foxes for coats. And it was a very lucrative business. Most of it was gone. In my memory, there was still a tower there and a caretaker's quarters. If you look in the 1930s at the grand lists at Bethany, you'll find that the assessment of these silver foxes was incredibly high. I'm going to have to tell you what this is. It doesn't mean much to you, maybe. This little wavy line is Litchfield Turnpike. This straight line is Amity Road. And I'm going to read it for you because I know you can't read it because it's not a good copy. This is from a manuscript map of 1817 that was loaned to us by the Amity and Woodbridge Historical Society to photograph. And it says Shunpike. And this says gate. It's a toll gate. You notice the Shunpike go up the Turnpike, you're still going to have to pay toll at Bethany. You won't have to pay toll at Woodbridge, but you have to pay toll at Bethany. This point, where Amity Road ended prior to 1973, I think. In 1973, what happened is we decided to number all the houses in Bethany, and we changed some road names. So what we did is we took this section of this is Litchfield Turnpike. We took this section of Litchfield Turnpike and called it Amity Road. So today, Amity Road includes the original Amity Road and this section of Litchfield Turnpike that goes from this intersection to the Naugatuck line. And this little thing, this is the section of Amity of road that got straightened. Perhaps you remember, I don't know how many of you remember, the state came along and I guess it was in the early 60s, straightened this section of road. This little loop became Grant Road and became a town road. And the new road is located just about in here. Up here, there are two symbols for mountains, and this word says straits. And they're talking about the straits, the narrow area between the two mountains. And this narrow area has funneled not only Beacon Hill Brook, but traffic on roads for centuries. I'm sure the Indians used this as a path. It was an easy way to get through. Let's face it, Indians weren't dumb. They didn't climb over the mountain if they could find an easier route any more than we would. Litchfield Turnpike, named because it went from the New Haven Green to the Litchfield Green, was originally incorporated as Straits Turnpike. It was a turnpike that went to the Straits. This is one of the few photographs left, and it's not a great one, but of the old Tuttle House that stood at the intersection of Amity Road and Litchfield Turnpike. I don't know whose Model T or whose car that is, but it looks like he's encountered some snow. We have a mailbox out here, and the old house, as I remember it, Helen and Henry built a newer house up on the hill, and then built Tuttle Court just before the old house. This today is a part of Litchfield Turnpike that reaches, that leads to Route 42 south. Now, anyone who's been around town, had been around town in the 50s, would know who's hiding under this racing boat. This is George Lake. I believe he bought this property from the Tuttles, the old barn, and he didn't move to town, but he moved just about everything he could to town. He was an authentic local character, and I think we have to say a couple words about him. I just remember him. He seemed to have an opinion about everything. He was a roofer. You can see that he found a use for those leftover shingles from every job. The interior of the barn was much more cluttered than the exterior. It was almost impossible to move from one place to another. He just absolutely filled up the barn and much of the property. When the state came along and widened this section of road, they took this land and they tore down the house, the barn rather. And they separated this property from the pond that many people knew as Lay's Pond. When I was a youngster, it was called the Hotel Pond. Just one more thing about George here, because he's an interesting character. This blackboard out here was typical. Every time he came to town, he was here every weekend and many times during the week, he'd open up the door and he'd write a little saying on that for the edifications of the passers-by. He never minded sharing his philosophy with others. This was the Perkins house, that Archibald Perkins house. Seems to have a hitching post. I've forgotten that. At any rate, Archibald Perkins was a toll taker on the Litchfield Turnpike, and this was the gate that you had where you had to pay. Technically, this is not on Amity Road, but I told you I'd cheat a little bit. Otherwise, how could I come up with 25% of the old houses are on Amity Road. The Gate School, as it appeared, trying to think, probably in the teens or 20s. Moving further on your right-hand side, you'll see this little building. And what is it? It's not a house, it's not a barn. What on earth is it? Elmshade Garage. At one time, it was a service station. It was a filling station as well. At this particular time, in the 1930s, the Doolittles sold Chryslers and Plymouths. Earlier than that, they had a Ford dealership. They sold Model T Fords. Matter of fact, I was in there one time, and there were still a few Model T parts and wrenches and things around years ago. Later on, later on, it was used as a Hudson dealer by Wesley Doolittle. This is what it looked like. I particularly like the Hupmobile wrecker that was made out of a touring car. And the 22-cent gas isn't bad either. But you have to crank it. No electric pumps here. This is the elm. See the elm trees there? Elm shade garage. That's that classic base shape that you get from an elm tree. And this is the Doolittle house next to it. Technically, it's not on Amity Road. It's on Grant Road, but it's readily visible from Amity Road. Less readily visible, and certainly a lot more of a stretch, is the Ives house. This is the front of it. You can only see the back of it from present-day Route 63. But it is a handsome old house, as is this one. It's presently the home of the Daptons. Well, we're going to get back onto the main route. That's enough digression. Just had to show you this beautiful fall picture. You know, you really don't have to go to Vermont to see foliage. And this is Beacon Mountain. It's a state forest now. By the way, we're getting near Naugatuck, so you can start to get hopeful that we're almost done. Beacon Cap. If you haven't hiked up the Beacon Cap, it's a wonderful hike. We have a state forest. We have two state forests. Well, we have a state forest and a state park in Bethany. Naugatuck State Forest and West Rock Ridge State Park. We have a lot of assets of that sort. Tollgate Road, this is a new small subdivision road, but the owners were wondering what to name it, and the Historical Society thought that it would be good to commemorate the fact that this area of Bethany was known as the Gate region, and the school was called the Gate School because of the toll gate. Just beyond that, there was the Perkins Sawmill, now gone. A couple of Perkins houses. Adna Perkins. It's a little different today. It's hard to see because these trees are even larger. So I gave you a picture from the 60s. That's by the way, that's a view from the north, which is the wrong way for us. If we're going to Naugatuck. You have to kind of pretend that we're on a tour bus and you turn around and look at it. Immediately across the street, an even earlier house, and this is right near do we have an avenue in Bethany? Well, we have three of them. First, second, and third, and these are located in the mobile home park. I don't think it's called that anymore. I think it's the Bethany Community or something like that. This was back on the gas station. That's the most northerly of the gas stations in Bethany and service garages. This was across the Chillin-Sperry house immediately across the street. Road. Have to include the Twitchell house. This is fairly recently was sold by the building was sold by the Connecticut Water Company. And the new owners have done some improvements. Originally, it was on the other side of the brook, and included this large mill building, which housed such things as carting equipment to cart wool. These are the straits. I mean, this is pretty dramatic. I just wanted you to see what you were up against. There is a brook down in here, and next to the brook, you know, we have the road. But you know, it's obviously the gap that is the course of least resistance. This small building is no longer used, but contains a pumping facility for the Connecticut Water Company. And they still have a diversion here, which allows them to pump water out of that Beacon Hill Brook and up to their large reservoir at the end of Edwards Road. And Naugatuck line, this area was part of Bethany, by the way, for 12 years. The Straitsville area, we gave up when Naugatuck was formed. And that's it. Somebody will get the lights. That's your trip up Amity Road. And we got amazing gas mileage.
Entertaining, educational. Did anybody raise their hand and say they didn't learn something tonight? Don't forget the goodies in the back. Thank you very much for coming.